He thought the desert would swallow his memories. He thought a broken-down truck and an empty horizon could finally drown out the echoes of gunfire. But on that wind-scoured night in northern Arizona, the thing that stopped Ethan Cole in his tracks wasn't a nightmare from the war. It was a dog. The storm had moved in fast, a wall of slate-colored clouds rolling over the high desert like a slow avalanche. Wind howled across the plateau, flinging grit against the rusted gas pumps and shattered windows of the abandoned service station where Ethan had chosen to park his truck for the night. Lightning briefly lit the landscape. Scrub brush, distant buttes, the skeletons of long-closed businesses along a forgotten stretch of highway, and in the middle of it, a German shepherd standing dead center in the cracked parking lot, staring at him. Ethan cut the engine. The sudden silence was almost jarring. Rain began to spit against the windshield. The dog didn't move. He was lean, coat dull and dust-matted, ribs too visible beneath black and tan fur. Not feral, though. There was a wary intelligence in his eyes, and the torn remnants of a leather collar still hung around his neck. "Where did you come from, buddy?" Ethan muttered. Instinct told him to stay inside, lock the doors, try to sleep. Instinct also said that any stray out here had learned not to trust humans. But there was something in that dog's gaze that cut straight through the numbness Ethan carried like armor. Something that looked a lot like need, the kind that had nothing to do with food. He grabbed a half-eaten sandwich from the passenger seat, opened the door, and stepped out into the wind. The dog's ears pricked, but he didn't back away. He just watched, muscles coiled, as Ethan approached slowly, hands visible. "Easy," Ethan said quietly. His voice still had the clipped calm of a former soldier giving orders under fire. "You look like you haven't eaten in days." He tore off a chunk of bread and meat and dropped it on the asphalt halfway between them. Any starving animal should have lunged. This one didn't. The dog stepped forward, sniffed the food, then lifted his head and looked straight at Ethan. His eyes were dark, steady, and full of something that made the hairs on the back of Ethan's neck stand up. Then the dog did something strange. He turned away, limping slightly. Ethan noticed a faint stiffness in one hind leg and trotted toward the edge of the lot. After several paces, he stopped, glanced back over his shoulder, and barked once. Sharp, almost impatient. Then he kept going, nose into the wind, as if expecting Ethan to follow. Ethan frowned. "You serious?" The dog barked again. Short, insistent. Lightning flashed again, outlining his silhouette against the dark. Any sane man would have gone back to his truck. Ethan Cole hadn't felt sane in a long time. The dishonorable discharge paperwork in the glove compartment said he'd failed to maintain discipline under fire. That was the official phrase. It didn't mention the ambush in Syria, the bad intel, the friends he'd watched bleed out on sand that turned to mud under the weight of their blood. It didn't mention the way the army had needed a scapegoat when the mission went wrong. It didn't mention the nights that still woke him up, choking on air that smelled like burning diesel and cordite. He'd tried whiskey, he'd tried silence. Neither had erased anything. Now this dog was staring at him like he was the one on trial. "Fine," Ethan muttered, pulling his jacket tighter. "You win." He grabbed a flashlight from the truck, slipped his old sidearm into the back of his waistband, out of habit more than expectation, and followed. The dog, he'd earn a name later, Ethan decided, led him away from the highway, across the cracked concrete, and into the dark desert beyond. The wind stung his face, carrying the sharp scent of creosote and dust. Rain intensified, turning the ground slick under his boots. Within minutes, the service station lights were swallowed by darkness. The dog moved with purpose, pausing now and then to make sure Ethan was still there, then pressing onward over low ridges and dry washes. After 10-15 minutes, Ethan realized this wasn't a random wander. The animal was following a path he knew well. Ethan swept his flashlight beam across the landscape. Out here, isolated structures meant old ranch houses, cell towers, or trailers. They crested a shallow rise, and Ethan saw it. Down in a shallow basin sat a mobile home, its aluminum siding scorched black in places, windows blown out, the roof partially peeled back like the lid of a can. The remnants of yellow police tape flapped in the wind, long since torn loose. The dog stopped at the edge of the basin, looking back at Ethan with a quiet urgency. "Fire," Ethan murmured, "or explosion." He descended carefully. The ground around the trailer was littered with glass, twisted metal, and half-buried debris. The air still carried the faint, sour smell of burned plastic, even after whatever months had passed. The dog trotted straight to a point near the broken steps. He nudged something half-hidden beneath a sheet of charred siding, then pawed at it, whining once. Ethan knelt, lifted the metal aside, and froze. It was a backpack, or what was left of one. The outer fabric was scorched, but the zipper and straps remained intact. A small, melted plastic charm in the shape of a cartoon whale dangled from one loop. On the front pocket, somehow untouched by flame, was a name written in black marker in a looping, careful hand, Maddie. His throat tightened. He glanced at the dog. "That yours?" he asked softly. The dog pressed his nose against the backpack and let out another soft, urgent whine. Ethan's fingers moved automatically. He slowly unzipped the main compartment. Inside, protected by a half-melted but still intact lunchbox and a tangle of children's clothes, was a metal cash box the size of a Bible. Its paint was blistered from heat, but it had kept its shape. Someone had hidden it inside a child's backpack, someone who had been afraid. Ethan lifted it out. It was heavier than it looked. His soldier's brain woke up fully now, shaking off the fog of exhaustion. Abandoned trailer, burn damage that didn't look like a typical accidental kitchen fire, police tape already gone, a hidden lockbox, and a dog who had somehow survived and come back here, then dragged a stranger through a storm to find it. "You're not hungry," Ethan murmured. "You're on a mission." The dog watched him, chest rising and falling, rain glistening on his fur. "Okay," Ethan said, more to himself than to the dog. "Let's see what you dragged me into." He carried the lockbox into the shadow of what had been the trailer's front room, away from the worst of the rain, and jimmied the bent latch with a piece of metal he found in the debris. The lock gave with a reluctant snap. Inside were three things: a cheap prepaid cell phone with a spider-webbed screen, a bundle of folded documents wrapped in a plastic grocery bag, and a flash drive taped to the underside of the lid, as if someone had wanted to make sure it wouldn't be overlooked. Ethan's pulse picked up. He powered on the phone. To his surprise, the screen flickered to life. The battery indicator blinked red, nearly dead. Only one video file sat in the gallery. It was time-stamped 6 weeks earlier. He tapped it. The screen showed a woman in her early 30s, sitting at a kitchen table that might once have belonged in this very trailer. Her dark hair was pulled into a messy bun, blue scrubs visible beneath a gray hoodie. She looked tired, but what struck Ethan most was the fear in her eyes. "Okay," she said, voice shaking slightly. "If you're seeing this and I'm not there to explain..." A crash sounded somewhere off camera. She flinched and looked toward the door before forcing herself to continue. "My name is Dr. Hannah Price. I work at Northbridge Rehabilitation Center. If something happens to me, it won't be an accident." The dog, who had settled beside Ethan, let out a low growl at the sound of her voice. It wasn't anger. It was recognition. Hannah glanced off-screen again, then leaned forward, lowering her voice. "They're using our soldiers," she whispered. "They're testing drugs that were never approved, lying about consent forms. They say it's to help with PTSD, to suppress nightmares, but the side effects..." Her voice broke. "Seizures, psychosis, heart failure. Men who survived 3 tours are dying in their sleep." Thunder rolled in the distance, blurring with the recorded sound of something heavy slamming in Hannah's video. "I stole what I could," she said quickly. "Copies of files, patient logs, shipment records. It's all in the box. If I don't make it out, I need someone to get this to U.S. Marshal Franklin Ames in Flagstaff. He's the only one who didn't hang up on me when I started asking questions." Her eyes glistened. She blinked hard, looked toward the camera like she was trying to memorize whoever might someday watch this. "If I can't do it..." Her voice broke again. She swallowed. "Rex knows the way. He knows Ames. He trusts him. Follow the dog." She looked down, off camera. Ethan heard the faint jingle of a collar. "If you find this, please don't let them bury it. Don't let them bury us. They already took too many." One last noise cut through the recording. A vehicle engine outside, doors slamming, voices shouting. Hannah's head snapped toward the sound. Panic flared in her eyes. "Rex! Crate!" she hissed. "Stay hidden." The screen went black. The phone died in Ethan's hand. For a long moment, the The wind and distant thunder were the only sounds. "Rex," Ethan said softly, turning to the dog. The shepherd stared back. In the flashlight's dim glow, Ethan could see the faint lines where a name tag had once been clipped to the torn leather collar. "Rex," he repeated. The name fit like it had been there all along. "You brought me to her." He felt something he hadn't felt in months, something sharp and hot beneath the numbness. Anger, not the wild, aimless rage that used to push him toward fights in cheap bars. Focused anger. He'd seen the aftermath of bad orders. He'd watched good men die because someone behind a desk had decided their lives were expendable. But this, experimenting on wounded veterans, then killing anyone who tried to blow the whistle, that was a different kind of betrayal. Ethan opened the plastic-wrapped bundle. Inside, he found printed emails, patient charts, inventory logs for drugs, with names he recognized and some he didn't. He saw the words Northbridge Rehabilitation Center over and over, and there, on half a dozen forms, in the blank marked attending physician, was the same signature, Dr. Hannah Price. The flash drive, he guessed, was a digital mirror of everything he now held in his hands. He slid it into his pocket, folded the papers, and tucked them carefully into his jacket. Rex watched every movement. "You were supposed to find Ames," Ethan said quietly. "Instead, you got me." He swallowed, feeling the weight of his own history pressing in. His dishonorable discharge meant most people saw him as unstable, unreliable, a liar trying to rewrite his story. Why should anyone trust him with this? "Because you know exactly what it feels like," a voice inside him whispered, "to be used and thrown away, to be told to shut up and take the blame." He stood, rain dripping from the brim of his cap. Lightning split the sky again, illuminating the desolation around them. "Okay, Rex," he said, "here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna get this to Ames. And if what Hannah said is true." He looked back at the burned-out trailer, at the remnants of a life someone had tried to erase. "Then, we're going to make sure the people who did this don't sleep so well at night." Rex huffed softly as if in agreement. Ethan whistled once and jerked his head toward the distant glow of the highway. "Come on, partner." The dog fell into step beside him without hesitation. The road to Flagstaff was long, pocked with potholes and lined with memories Ethan didn't want. Every mile marker felt like a choice he could still back out of. Drop the box at the nearest police station, walk away, let someone else carry the weight. But each time doubt crept in, he glanced at Rex curled in the passenger seat, one ear perpetually cocked toward the window, like he was listening for something only he could hear. It had taken 6 weeks for someone to follow him. 6 weeks of a dog haunting truck stops and highway shoulders, searching for a human who would understand. Ethan couldn't be the man who turned away now. He made it to Flagstaff just before dawn. The city was a blur of wet pavement and sodium streetlights. He parked a block away from the federal building and sat for a moment, hand resting on the steering wheel. "I talk," he muttered, "and they run my name. They see the discharge, the psychological notes. They see the fights. They see every mistake I ever made and none of what it cost to get there." Rex nudged his elbow with a cold nose. "Yeah," Ethan said. "You're right. Not about me this time, is it?" He stepped out into the chill air, Rex close at his heel, and walked through the glass doors. U.S. Marshal Franklin Ames was not what Ethan expected. He'd pictured a stiff-backed career lawman who'd see Ethan as a problem to manage. Instead, the man who eventually stepped into the small interview room, where Ethan waited, looked like someone who had spent too many years carrying bad news. Gray hair thinning at the temples, lines around his eyes deep enough to map a lifetime. But his gaze was sharp, assessing. "I'm Ames," he said simply. His eyes flicked to Rex, then back to Ethan. "You said you have something that belongs to Hannah Price." Ethan slid the flash drive and the packet of documents across the table. "I have what's left of her," he said. He expected skepticism, maybe even anger. Instead, Amos's shoulders sagged a fraction, as if a weight he'd been pretending didn't exist just doubled. "I told her to stop," Ames murmured, more to himself than to Ethan. "Told her to lie low, to wait until I had more pull in D.C. She refused." He picked up the flash drive carefully, like it might break from being handled too roughly. "Told me if anything happened, a dog might show up at my door." His gaze dropped to Rex. "Guess he got detoured." "They burned her house," Ethan said quietly. They made it look like a propane accident. There was kid stuff in there. Ames closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, there was something steely behind the grief. "You said your name was Cole," he said. "Ethan Cole." "Yes, sir." Ames's eyes narrowed. "3rd Battalion, Syria, convoy ambush outside Al-Halim." The room seemed to shrink. "Yes," Ethan said slowly. "How do you—" "Because we opened a quiet inquiry when that mission went sideways," Ames said. "And then someone above my pay grade shut it down. Hard." He tapped the stack of papers. "If what's on this drive is what I think it is, Northbridge isn't just dirty. It's connected to whatever turned you into the Army's favorite scapegoat." Heat flared in Ethan's chest. "You're telling me the same people who got my team killed are running that clinic?" "I'm telling you nothing yet," Ames replied. "I'm saying it smells the same." He stood abruptly. "I can't promise you justice," he said, "but I can promise you this. If there's enough here to blow the lid off Northbridge, I'll light the fuse." He looked down at Rex, who sat calmly at Ethan's side, gaze unwavering. "And I'll make sure they never touch that dog again." For the first time in years, Ethan felt something like solid ground beneath his feet. He never saw the first attempt coming. 3 days after handing over the evidence, Ethan walked out of a cheap motel on the edge of town, intending to grab coffee before hitting the road. He told himself he'd done his part. Ames would take it from here. He could disappear again, drift another few hundred miles, and try to outdrive his own head. He made it as far as the parking lot. Rex stiffened first. The dog's ears shot forward. He leaned into the leash, hackles rising, staring toward a white utility van idling by the dumpster. Nothing unusual on the surface, company logo, local phone number, a ladder on the roof. Then Ethan saw it, the tiniest flash of movement behind the back-tinted window. Not a curious glance. Aiming. He didn't think. He moved. "Down!" he snarled, yanking Rex with him as he dove behind a row of parked cars. The first shots were suppressed, soft coughs that barely registered over the hum of the highway. But the impact was unmistakable. Glass exploding, metal pinging, a spray of concrete dust where rounds hit the curb. Ethan pushed Rex flat and rolled, drawing his pistol in one fluid motion. A side mirror shattered inches from his head. The white van's side door slammed open. 2 men in plain clothes spilled out, moving with the unnerving, efficient calm of professionals who'd done this before. Not street thugs, contractors. "Get to cover!" Ethan hissed at Rex, even though he knew the dog wouldn't leave his side. He fired in short, controlled bursts, not to hit, just to force the shooters back behind their vehicle. He saw enough in those brief flashes: body armor beneath jackets, comms, earpieces, the glint of compact suppressed carbines. One of them shouted into a radio. Ethan caught a single phrase between gunshots. "Target has the dog." They weren't here to mug him. They weren't even here for him. They were here for Rex. "You idiots move fast," Ethan muttered under his breath. "Files must have hit a nerve." A bullet grazed his forearm, burning hot. Another punched into the hood of the sedan he was crouched behind. Rex stayed low, pressed against Ethan's leg, eyes locked on the threat. No barking this time, no lunging, just a tension that radiated from every muscle. "Stay," Ethan said harshly. "That's an order." He scanned the lot. 2 shooters, 1 van. No civilians nearby. Noise of traffic masking most of the fight. He could stand there and trade rounds until they got lucky. Or he could move. He chose the latter. In the end, it wasn't some brilliant tactical maneuver that saved them. It was a combination of instinct, luck, and the fact that the men trying to kill him had underestimated the dog. One shooter flanked left, hugging the row of cars. The other laid down suppressing fire. Ethan tracked the flank, waiting for his moment. He didn't see the oil stain. The man did, too late. His boot hit the slick patch beside a leaky pickup and shot out from under him. He went down hard, weapons skittering. Rex was already moving. The dog launched like a missile, closing the distance in a blur of black and tan. His jaws clamped down on the man's forearm before he could recover, teeth sinking through fabric and flesh. The man screamed, more in shock than pain, and lashed out with his free hand. Ethan didn't give him a second chance. 2 shots, center mass. The man jerked, went limp. The second shooter swung his weapon toward the tangle of dog and fallen partner, torn between firing and friendly fire. Ethan took his shot. The bullet caught the man high in the shoulder. He spun, slid behind the van door, and shouted something ragged and furious into his comm. Tires squealed. The van lurched forward, driver unseen, fishtailing out of the lot as the remaining shooter dove inside. In seconds they were gone, leaving behind only broken glass, spent brass, and one very dead man bleeding into the cracked asphalt. Sirens would be coming. Someone would have heard eventually. Ethan shoved his weapon away and checked Rex over with shaking hands. Blood stained the dog's muzzle and paws, but most of it wasn't his. A shallow graze cut along his flank, already clotting. "You okay?" Ethan asked roughly. Rex's tail thumped once, hard, like the question was an insult. "Yeah," Ethan said. "Me too." He knew what this meant. Northbridge, or whoever backed it, had figured out the evidence was in play. They'd connected it to Hannah, to Ames, to the dog who'd escaped, and they'd sent professionals to clean up the loose ends. Hannah's last words echoed in his head. "Follow the dog." Ethan looked down at Rex, at those steady, intelligent eyes. "They're not just after you anymore," he said quietly. "They're after anyone who gets near you." He thought of running, vanishing into the maze of highways and small towns that stretched across the Southwest. It was a tempting fantasy. But the fantasy ended with another burned trailer, another dog waiting alone in the dark. He grabbed the cash box from his truck, stuffed it and his few belongings into a duffel, and whistled once to Rex. "New plan," he said. "We're not passing this off to someone else. We're seeing it through." The town of Arroyo Mesa barely showed up on most maps. A scattering of low buildings shoved up against red rock cliffs, a faded main street lined with a diner, a feed store, a gas station that looked marginally less abandoned than the one Ethan had found Rex near. It existed mostly as a stopover between larger somewheres. It was also 10 miles from Northbridge Rehabilitation Center. The clinic sat out on its own, a cluster of low, modern buildings surrounded by a chain-link fence and a neatly maintained lawn that looked painfully green against the dry hills. To anyone driving by, it would look like a sanctuary, a place where broken veterans could find peace and treatment. Ethan now knew better. He parked on the far end of town and walked to the diner with Rex at his side. Neon buzzed in the window. The sign above the door read, "Harper's," the paint chipped but stubborn. The bell over the door jingled as he stepped in. Conversation dipped. The place was nearly empty. Just a couple of truckers in a corner booth and an old man nursing coffee at the counter. Behind that counter stood a woman about his age, dark hair pulled into a knot, sleeves rolled up, moving with the efficient rhythm of someone who'd lived her whole life between orders. Her eyes flicked to him, then dropped to Rex, and froze. The coffee pot stopped halfway to a mug. Her face went pale. "Where did you get that dog?" she whispered. Ethan's hand drifted instinctively toward his waistband before he stopped himself. "Found him," he said carefully. "Out near mile marker 212. Why?" The woman stepped around the counter like she didn't trust her legs. Up close, Ethan saw the faint shadows under her eyes, the lines of someone who hadn't been sleeping well, or at all. She crouched slowly, hand extended. "Rex?" she whispered, voice breaking. The dog's ears pricked. He sniffed her hand, then lunged forward with a sound halfway between a bark and a sob. His tail beat so hard it nearly knocked a stool over. He buried his head against her chest, whining, paws scraping at her arms as if trying to climb into them. The woman wrapped her arms around his neck and squeezed like she might never let go. Ethan looked away, throat tight. "Hannah," the woman murmured into the dog's fur. "Oh, Han, you stubborn idiot." She pulled back finally, wiping at her eyes with the heel of her hand. "He was my sister's," she said to Ethan. She sent him away the night of the fire. I thought he died out there, or ran so far I'd never see him again." Her gaze sharpened suddenly, cutting through the tears. "If you have Rex," she said slowly, "you have something else." Ethan studied her for a moment, then nodded once. "Dr. Hannah Price was your sister," he said. "I saw her video." The woman closed her eyes briefly at the name, like it was both a wound and a blessing just to hear it. "I'm Lila," she said. Lila Harper. Hannah used our family name at the diner because this town doesn't trust outsiders, but she always kept Price on the hospital paperwork. Said it made it easier if she had to blow the whistle. A humorless smile flickered and died. Guess she was right. The old man at the counter cleared his throat pointedly. Lila shot him a look. "It's okay, Red," she said. "He's with Rex." "That's supposed to make me feel better?" the man grumbled. But there was something like respect in his eyes when he looked at the dog. Lila motioned Ethan toward the back. "We shouldn't talk out here." She led them into a small office behind the kitchen, shut the door, and locked it. "Okay," she said, leaning against the desk. "Tell me everything." So he did. He told her about the trailer, about the lockbox, about Ames, about the men in the van. When he finished, Lila's hands were shaking so hard she had to sit down. "They told me it was a gas leak," she whispered. "The sheriff, the fire marshal, said Hannah fell asleep with the stove on after a late shift. They brought me a box of whatever they thought I wouldn't question. I tried calling the clinic, but they said she never came in that day, that she'd been acting unstable." She barked out a short, bitter laugh. "And then they suggested I talk to someone at Northbridge about grief counseling." Ethan's jaw clenched. "They kill your sister and then try to sell you on their services." "Welcome to modern health care," Lila said flatly. She reached out, fingers brushing the flash drive where it sat on the desk. There was something deadly calm in her movements now. "What's on here?" she said. "It's enough to shut them down?" "If Ames does his job," Ethan said, "it's more than enough." "And if he doesn't?" "Then we drag it into the light ourselves." Lila looked at him for a long time. "You sound like Hannah," she said finally. "Right before she started sleeping with a handgun under her pillow." She straightened. "You said they sent people after you, that they're after Rex. That means they know something's gone wrong, but they don't know how much we have." "We?" Ethan echoed. Lila gave him a look. "You brought my sister's dog home in a loaded gunfight to my front door," she said. "You think I'm going to let you walk out of here and handle this alone?" Rex nudged her hand approvingly. Ethan exhaled slowly. "Northbridge won't play fair," he said. "This isn't going to be some clean courtroom drama where the truth sets everybody free." Lila's eyes hardened. "They already set my world on fire once," she said. "They don't get to do it again." They came at Northbridge from underneath. On paper, the clinic had more security than some prisons. Perimeter cameras, keyed entry doors, guards at the front gate who wore uniforms that looked suspiciously like those of private military contractors. Above ground, it was a fortress. Below ground, it was still just a building, and buildings leaked. It was Lila who remembered the storm drain. "Before Northbridge," she said, unrolling a county infrastructure map on the diner's kitchen table late that night. "This used to be a state-run psychiatric facility. They had a laundry building downslope and a drainage culvert that carried runoff under the property into the dry riverbed." She stabbed a finger at a faded line on the paper. "They built on top of most of it, but the pipe's still there." Ethan followed the line with his eyes. "If we can get inside," he murmured, more to himself than to her, "we can access their network from within the firewall, copy files, record what we see. Or," Lila added, "we can find whatever Hannah couldn't get out before they came for her." They didn't have fancy equipment, no motion sensors, no hacking tools beyond a used laptop, and some open-source software. What they did have was Ethan's training, Lila's knowledge of the town, and a dog who had spent months roaming the edges of Northbridge like a ghost. They moved at midnight. The desert was quiet, sky full of stars so sharp it felt like they might cut skin. The air had the brittle cold of high altitude, making each breath feel like broken glass. Ethan wore dark clothes, his old rucksack slung over one shoulder. Lila, despite his objections, was right beside him in a black hoodie and jeans, hair tucked under a cap. Rex moved ahead, nose to the ground, tail low, but steady. They followed the dry riverbed until the concrete mouth of the culvert loomed ahead. Rust streaks stained the walls around it. The faint trickle of water carried the chemical tang of bleach and detergent. "Guess they still do laundry," Lila whispered. They squeezed inside, hunched over, boots slipping on slimy concrete. The tunnel angled upward slightly, heading beneath the clinic grounds. After 100 yards, a square of faint light appeared ahead. A metal grate blocked the end of the tunnel. Beyond it, Ethan could just make out a cramped utility room, pipes, valves, a humming pump. "Stay," he murmured to Rex, who sat obediently. He tested the grate with his fingers. It was old, bolts rusted. With enough leverage and quiet, they might... Rex shifted suddenly, ears going up. Ethan froze, voices, faint, above them. A door opening, then closing. Footsteps overhead. The pump in the room beyond sputtered, then shut off. Someone was doing maintenance. If they pushed the grate now, and it squealed. He made a decision. He eased back and pressed himself against the tunnel wall, motioning Lila to do the same. Rex slid between them, body taut but silent. They waited. The footsteps came closer. A flashlight beam swept the utility room, brushing past the mouth of the culvert, but not stopping. The worker, Ethan saw only a glimpse of gray coveralls and worn boots, cursed under his breath as he adjusted something on the pump. A minute stretched, 2. Then, somewhere deeper in the building, an alarm beeped. The worker sighed, muttered something about "damn sensors," and left, the door swinging shut behind him. Ethan counted to 30 under his breath. Then he moved. The grate came loose with a low groan that made both of them flinch, but the old bolts gave way more easily than he'd hoped. He eased it aside, slid into the utility room, then reached back to help Lila climb through. Rex squeezed under the lowest edge with a determined wriggle. They were in. On the floor above, Northbridge's corridors smelled like antiseptic and stale air conditioning. The trio moved in the shadows, hugging walls, pausing whenever the squeak of rubber soles or the rattle of a cart echoed nearby. Ethan had memorized the floor plan from stolen glimpses and county records. Records said the clinic had 2 wings, residential and research. Patients weren't supposed to go near the latter. Hannah's notes, however, had made it clear where the real damage was being done. They slipped through an unmarked door and descended a staircase that didn't appear on any public blueprint. Down here, the air grew colder. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Rex stopped halfway down, nose lifting. A low rumble started in his chest. "What is it?" Lila whispered. Ethan didn't answer. He heard it too now, a muffled sound beneath the hum, a cry, sharp, cut off, human. He moved faster. The hallway at the bottom was lined with heavy doors, each with a small reinforced window. No nameplates, just numbers. No sounds from within, except one. Behind a door marked R7, someone was breathing too fast. Ethan pressed his ear to the steel. "Hello?" he whispered. No response. Just that ragged, shaky inhale-exhale. Against every instinct screaming at him to keep moving, he cracked the door open. The room beyond was small and bare. A bed bolted to the floor, a single chair, a camera in the corner, red light blinking. On the bed sat a man about Ethan's age, hospital gown hanging loose on his thin frame. Electrodes clung to his temples. His eyes were wide and unfocused, but when Ethan stepped in, they snapped to him with a jolt of recognition. "Cole," the man rasped. The world tilted. "Riley?" Ethan breathed. Sergeant Tom Riley had been in the vehicle ahead of Ethan's during that last convoy. The explosion had thrown his body 30 feet. They'd told Ethan he died on the way to Germany. They'd lied. Riley tried to stand, failed, clung to the bed rail. They said you blamed us," he mumbled. "Said you lost it, didn't think you were real." Ethan stepped forward, grabbing his shoulders. Up close he could see the tremor in Riley's hands, the faint purple bruising along his veins. "What did they do to you?" he demanded. Riley's gaze flicked to the corners. "Cameras," he whispered. "They're always watching, always tweaking the dosage. You feel good, then you feel nothing, then you feel like you're watching yourself from across the room." Lila hovered near the door, face pale. "Ethan," she hissed, "we can't stay." Rex began to bark, short, fierce bursts aimed at the camera. The red light flickered and went out. Lila stared. "Did he just... Maybe the sound overloaded something," Ethan said. "I don't care. We're out of time." He ripped the electrodes from Riley's temples. "Can you walk?" Riley nodded, then swayed. Ethan caught him. "They're using us," Riley muttered. "Said we were lucky, said we were part of the cure, but they keep pushing the doses. Some don't wake up. Others just scream." His voice broke on the last word. Lila stepped forward, slipped Riley's arm over her shoulder. "Lean on me," she said. "We're getting you out of here." Ethan knew what that meant. One more person. One more life depending on him. One more weight on the scale. He also knew there was no universe in which he was leaving Riley behind. They moved as fast as they dared, ducking into alcoves when staff passed, timing their steps to the squeak of distant gauges and the hiss of automatic doors. More than once someone glanced their way and seemed about to ask a question. Then saw Rex, saw the quiet, coiled readiness in Ethan's posture, and chose to look away. They reached the small lab where Hannah's notes indicated she'd copied most of the data. Rows of computers hummed softly. Screensavers drifted across monitors. 2 minutes, Ethan said, fingers already flying over a keyboard. Lila kept watch at the door, Riley sagging in a chair, breaths shallow but steady. Rex prowled the room, nose twitching, tail stiff. Files began streaming to Ethan's thumb drive. Trial results, internal memos, shipment logs that matched the paperwork in Hannah's lockbox. Words and numbers blurred, but the weight of what they represented pressed down like a physical force. Unauthorized compounds, manipulated consent forms, payment records to shell companies that looped back again and again to the same holding group. Solarian Wellness, Holdings. He paused on one email thread. Between the clinical language and obscured jargon, a few phrases jumped out. Phase 3, Behavioral Compliance Metrics. Unexpected mortality within acceptable range. Pilot program with defense liaison still on schedule. His stomach roiled. They weren't trying to heal anyone. They were trying to build something, a way to turn trauma and loyalty into levers they could pull. And they'd picked wounded soldiers as their lab rats. He yanked the drive free. "Got it," he said. "We're—" The lights went red. An alarm shrieked, a high-pitched keening that knifed straight through bone. Metal shutters slammed down over nearby windows with a series of heavy clanks. Lila flinched. Riley clamped his hands over his ears. "Security breach in research wing," a calm, computerized voice intoned. "All units respond. Lockdown protocol engaged." Ethan swore under his breath. "Time to go," he said. They made it as far as the end of the hall. 2 men rounded the corner ahead, weapons already raised. Not hospital security this time. No badges, no hesitation. They moved like the ones in the van had moved. Rex snarled, a sound so deep it vibrated in Ethan's chest. "Back!" Ethan shouted. He fired first. The corridor erupted into chaos. Gunshots, plaster exploding from walls, fluorescent lights shattering overhead. Riley stumbled. Lila dragged him down behind a cart. Rex darted forward, teeth flashing, as one of the shooters tried to flank. The man cursed, kicked, but the dog held on, giving Ethan the half-second he needed to put a round in the man's thigh. The shooter went down, weapon clattering. The second retreated behind a corner, shouting into a comm. "Research wing. 3 hostiles. 1 K9. They have a patient." Ethan's mind ran the geometry of the building in a heartbeat. More would be coming. They'd be pinned in this hallway, cut off from the culvert. He turned to Lila. "Change of plan," he said. "Riley and I will draw them away. You take Rex." "Like hell," Lila snapped. "Lila," he said, voice rough. "If they get that drive, none of this matters. You're faster than we are. There's a service stairwell 2 doors back on the right. It goes up to the old psych wing. Less cameras, fewer guards. You and Rex take the drive. Get it out. Get it to Ames or the press or whoever you can find who isn't bought." "And you?" she demanded. "I keep them busy." He pressed the drive into her hand. Rex's gaze flicked between them. Lila stared at him, eyes searching. "You are not allowed to die in some hallway experiment room," she said, voice shaking. "You got my sister's dog home. You don't get to stop there." He managed a faint, twisted smile. "Not planning on it," he said. "But if it comes down to it, the world's going to need proof more than it needs one washed-up infantryman with a bad discharge." Rex growled softly, pushing his head against Ethan's hand. Ethan scratched behind his ears once, hard, like it was a promise. "Protect her," he whispered. "That's an order, soldier." The dog's gaze locked with his for one steady heartbeat. Then Lila grabbed Rex's collar and tugged him toward the stairwell. "You come back," she snapped over her shoulder. "You hear me? You follow us out of here." Ethan turned before she could see whatever was in his eyes. He stepped into the corridor, gun smoke already hanging in the air like fog, and welcomed the familiar, terrible calm that settled over him when he stepped into a fight he didn't expect to walk away from. They didn't catch Rex. They tried. Security footage would later show a blur of motion, black and tan and fury, darting down a stairwell, slipping through a closing fire door, vanishing into the confusion of a panicked evacuation. It would show armed men flooding the research wing, fighting a disciplined retreat against an unknown assailant that moved like a ghost, always one corner ahead, always drawing them away from the stairwell Lila and Rex had taken. It would show the moment Northbridge's director, a tall, silver-haired man named Dr. Malcolm Trent, arrived, shouting orders, eyes cold. "Contain this," he spat. "Nothing leaves, nothing." But something already had. Rex knew the way. He led Lila through corridors gone chaotic with flashing lights and staff running in every direction. When one route closed, he found another, nose guiding them toward the scent of outside air. Twice, Lila had to brace herself against a wall and fire blindly at a pursuing guard. Twice, Rex launched himself like a thrown spear, knocking men off balance long enough for her to push through. They burst out of a side exit into a loading bay. Night air slammed into their lungs, cold and clean. "Truck?" Lila gasped. Rex bounded toward a battered pickup with Harper's Diner hand-painted on the side. She'd parked it half a mile away in the scrub, hoping to avoid notice. Apparently, Northbridge's cameras had been more focused inward that night. As she fumbled with the keys, an engine roared behind them. Headlights flared. A black SUV shot into the lot, tires screeching. Doors flew open. Men in dark jackets poured out, weapons gleaming under the security lights. Rex sprang into the truck bed, teeth bared, jaws snapping at the air as if they could chase away bullets. Lila slammed the truck into gear. "Hold on," she whispered. She floored it. Gravel spit. The pickup fishtailed, then lunged forward. Gunshots cracked, punching holes in the rear fender. Rex crouched low, nails scraping metal, but he didn't duck. He stayed braced, eyes locked on the threat, growling like he could intimidate bullets. Lila cut across the employee lot, barreled over a curb, and smashed through a flimsy side gate in a shower of bent chain link. The truck bounced over the dry riverbed and hit the dirt road beyond with a bone-jarring slam. A glance in the rearview mirror showed the SUV stuck on the ditch. His wheels spinning, so she didn't slow down. Ethan didn't die in the research wing. He came close. By dawn, half of Northbridge's lower floors lay in shambles. Doors splintered, glass shattered, equipment destroyed in what official reports would later call an act of domestic terrorism perpetrated by a disgruntled former soldier. Ethan heard that phrase through a haze of pain hours later, wrists cuffed to a hospital bed in a different facility when a flat-voiced agent recited a list of charges that sounded like they belonged to someone else. Breaking and entering, assault, destruction of federal property, theft of restricted medical data. He didn't hear anything about unauthorized experiments, nothing about doctored consent forms, nothing about soldiers used like lab rats. But when they thought he was asleep, when they stepped into the hall to argue over jurisdiction, he caught pieces. Price was unstable. No proof any such program existed. This Cole guy has a history. They were setting the narrative. Again. He lay there, staring at the ceiling, body aching, mind numb. He didn't know if Lila had made it out. He didn't know if Rex was alive. He didn't know if Ames had received the second wave of data. All he knew was that the machine was already grinding into motion, ready to crush him a second time. A soft scuff of shoes at the door broke his spiral. "I thought you'd be awake," a familiar voice said. Ethan turned his head. Marshal Franklin Ames stood in the doorway, hands buried in the pockets of his wrinkled suit. A television mounted in the corner cast flickering light over his face. On the screen, a news anchor spoke over B-roll of Northbridge's front entrance swarming with FBI jackets. Anonymous sources suggest a federal investigation into the rehabilitation center's funding and treatment protocols was already underway. Ames picked up the remote and turned the volume down. "You're on every channel," he said. "They're trying very hard to make you look like a lunatic." "Is it working?" Ethan asked hoarsely. Ames's mouth twisted. "For some," he said, then added, For now, he pulled a folder from his coat and set it on the bedside table within Ethan's line of sight. We mirrored every byte from that thumb drive before anyone knew it existed, he said. And when your friend Lila Harper dumped a second batch in my lap a few hours ago, it was enough to push this onto the front burner in D.C. Relief hit so hard it made Ethan dizzy. Lila made it, he breathed. Rex? Ames hesitated for half a heartbeat. He did better than most humans I know, he said. They took a couple of rounds in the truck bed, missed him by inches. Seems your orders stuck. He didn't leave her side until she walked into my office and practically threw that drive at my head. He reached out and unclipped the cuffs from Ethan's wrist. Officially, he said, you're under investigation. Unofficially, he nodded toward the TV. You're about 3 hours away from being their worst nightmare. Because once the press smells blood, the kind of people running Northbridge don't get to control the story anymore. Ethan swallowed hard. What about Trent? He asked. And whoever signs his checks? Ames's gaze cooled. Solarian Wellness Holdings is already denying everything, he said. They'll throw Trent under a bus if they have to. Maybe 2 or 3 more. But the paper trail your little adventure uncovered is extensive. He tapped the folder. We're talking criminal conspiracy, human experimentation, fraud, and a nasty little side note about leveraging certain trial results for behavioral conditioning contracts with private security firms. Defense and justice have both perked up. No one wants to be standing next to this bonfire when it really starts to burn. Ethan let out a shaky breath. So what now? He asked. I get thrown back in a cell and wait for the courts to decide if they hate me less this time around? Ames studied him for a long moment. Officially, you were never there, he said quietly. Northbridge's security footage from last night is mysteriously corrupted. Some think that's the clinic covering its own tracks. Others think it's your doing. Personally, I'm not sure I want to know. He leaned in. But I can tell you this. There will be hearings. There will be indictments. There will be a lot of very expensive lawyers trying to argue that what happened to men like your friend Riley was necessary for progress. And there will be people like you and Lila ready to stand up and say otherwise. He smiled faintly. And this time, the discharge board doesn't get the last word. 2 months later, the world knew the name Northbridge. They knew it the way you know the name of a storm that wiped a town off the map. Whistleblower reports, testimony, shaky phone videos smuggled out by staff who'd grown a conscience. Lila testified before Congress, hands steady, voice clear, recounting the night her sister called her in tears. Scared and furious and determined, she showed them Hannah's video. She held up a photo of Rex, tail wagging, tongue lolling, standing beside her sister in front of the clinic's sign the day it opened. This dog, she told them, followed the route my sister taught him. When everything was burning, when everyone else either looked away or helped cover it up, Rex went looking for someone who'd listen. Cameras flashed. Commentators talked about the dog who saved the truth like it was a movie script. Behind the noise, real change moved, slow, grinding, but real. Northbridge shut down. Solarian Wellness scrambled under a wave of subpoenas. Laws were proposed, some even passed, tightening oversight on experimental treatments for veterans. Riley walked out of a rehab hospital under his own power, eyes clearer than they had been in years, side effects slowly unwinding as the cocktail in his system faded. And Ethan Cole found himself back in a place he never thought he'd see again. A uniform, not a dress uniform, not the sharp-pressed fabric of a formal ceremony, just a simple jacket worn over jeans, with a patch on the shoulder that read, Phoenix Ridge Veterans Trust. You don't have to fight alone. The trust had started as an idea Lila scribbled on a napkin one night at the diner. They'll spin this, she'd said. Say Northbridge was one bad apple, but there are veterans all over the country signing whatever's put in front of them, because they're desperate to sleep through the night. Ethan had looked at the napkin, at the words legal aid and independent advocates and no clinic money, and felt something settle inside him. A place where nobody gets to use us without answering to someone, he'd said. Where the people in charge remember what it costs to wear this, he added, tapping the ghost of a patch on his own shoulder. They'd built it together, Lila, Ames, a handful of lawyers with old debts to pay, and veterans who didn't want to forget what had been done in their name. Funding came from an unlikely source, a settlement Northbridge's insurers offered when it became clear the trust could drag them through court for years. Lila had laughed when she read the number. Hannah always said if she ever sued a hospital, she'd use the money to build one that didn't suck, she told Ethan. Guess this is close enough. On a cool evening, just as summer began to bleed into fall, Ethan stood on the edge of a newly poured concrete patio behind the repurposed ranch house that now served as the trust's headquarters. The air smelled like pine and grilled hamburgers. A dozen veterans milled around, some in wheelchairs, others leaning on canes, all with the same 1,000-yard stare, softened now by the presence of others who got it. Lila moved among them with plates and easy jokes, a living line between what had been and what could be. Rex lay at Ethan's feet, muzzle resting on his boots, eyes half closed. "You know," Lila said, stepping up beside him, "when I was a kid, I used to pretend our backyard was a secret base. Hannah and I would draw maps, assign code names, plan missions where we'd rescue people nobody else knew needed rescuing." She nodded toward the house. "Feels a little like that. Except now the dragons are real, and the swords are paperwork and court orders." Ethan huffed a quiet laugh. "I'll take legal dragons over ambushes any day," he said. Lila bumped his shoulder with hers. "You did good, soldier," she said softly. "You could have walked away. Plenty of people did. But when Rex picked you, you didn't pretend. Not to see." Ethan looked down at the dog. Rex opened his eyes and thumped his tail lazily, as if to say, "Damn right." "I think he saw something in me I'd been trying pretty hard to forget," Ethan said. Someone who still believed in missions that mattered. He watched Riley at the grill, laughing with a woman Ethan guessed was his sister. The tremor in his hands was barely noticeable now. Less like a symptom. More like a scar. "How's your file?" Lila asked after a moment. "The official one." Ethan shrugged. "The Army changed dishonorable to medical," he said. "They'll never admit they threw me under the bus on purpose, but they're sending a letter. And a check." "Gonna frame it?" she teased. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe I'll just use it to pay the guy who fixed the bullet holes in my truck." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sunset bleed red and gold across the horizon. "You ever think about if Rex had found someone else that night?" Lila asked quietly. "Somebody who just patched him up and dropped that lockbox at the nearest sheriff's office and went on with their life?" Ethan considered it. "Someone else might have done fine," he said, "or they might have handed it right back to the people who wanted it buried." He met her gaze. "But I know this. If I'd stayed in that truck, if I'd driven away, I'd still be running. From the war, from my own head, from the idea that any of it meant anything." He looked down at Rex again, at the dog who had dragged him through a storm into a burned-out life, and said, without words, "Get up. We're not done." "So maybe," Ethan said, "he didn't just save a bunch of strangers. Maybe he saved me first, just to make sure I'd be there for the rest." Lila's eyes shone in the fading light. "Sounds like something Hannah would have planned," she said. A breeze stirred, carrying the low murmur of conversation, the clink of plates, the occasional burst of laughter. For the first time in a long time, the sound didn't make Ethan flinch. Rex rolled onto his back, legs in the air, demanding belly rubs from anyone within reach. Ethan obliged, fingers digging into fur made glossy by regular meals and a life no longer spent dodging bullets. "You're retired now, you know," he told the dog. "No more covert missions, no more storm drains." Rex snorted, clearly unconvinced. "Well," Ethan conceded, "maybe just one more if we really need you." Lila laughed. "Don't say that too loud," she said. "Knowing our luck, the next mess will show up tomorrow." "Then we'll handle it," Ethan replied. He looked out over the small crowd, the broken, the healing, the stubborn ones who refused to let the worst thing that had ever happened to them be the last word. The scars didn't vanish. The nightmares didn't magically stop. Justice, even when it came, didn't bring back the dead. But standing there with Lila at his side and Rex at his feet, Ethan understood something he'd missed in all his running. The point wasn't to erase the past. The point was to build something in spite of it. Something that said to the next Hannah, the next Riley, the next soldier sitting in a dark room with a pill bottle and a choice, "You are not alone, and if they come for you, someone will come back for them." Rex snuggled closer, sighing contentedly. "Yeah, Ethan murmured, scratching him behind one ear. Especially if it's you. The dog's tail drummed against the patio like a quiet drumbeat of agreement. Lesson. Sometimes the thing that drags you back into the storm isn't a duty, a uniform, or a flag. Sometimes it's a pair of dark eyes in a battered dog's face, refusing your food and asking, without a single word, for something harder, to stand up, to listen, to believe that even when the system fails, people can choose not to. Ethan thought he was done with missions, done with trust, done with hope. But one loyal dog refused to let his story end in an empty truck on a forgotten highway. Rex reminded him, and anyone willing to watch, that loyalty doesn't always look like silence and obedience. Sometimes it looks like dragging the truth, bleeding and half-buried, back into the light, and refusing to leave until someone does something about it. And when one person answers that call, when one scarred soldier decides that another fight is worth it, the world changes, not all at once. Not everywhere, but enough. Enough for one more life to be saved, one more wrong to be dragged into the open, one more broken heart to learn that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means fighting so others don't have to break the same way. And sometimes, the bravest voice in that fight walks on 4 paws and never says a word.